Welcome back, everyone, to a brand new year and another turn of the cosmic wheel. In this first video of the new year, I wanted to address a question that a listener of this channel had once asked me. It was a topic I had wanted to make a video about for some time now, and this feels like the right moment to address it. The question is essentially this: what is the relation, if any, between the divine names in Islamic esotericism and the pantheons of gods we find in other traditions? Can we equate the two, or are the two metaphysical systems totally opposed? Essentially, what arises here is the distinction between a monotheist and polytheist metaphysics, which hopefully I'll be able to make clearer by the end of this video. Let us state the answer to this question right from the outset. This will probably situate us so that we won't get lost when I explain how we arrived at this conclusion. Essentially, Ibn Arabi's mysticism and theosophy hold polarities in a tension that he refuses to resolve. In a sense, the pattern of his work expresses what we know as a conjunctio oppositorum, so that the dualisms between creator and created, beloved and lover, lord and servant, subject and object, are held in what is called a theophanic union. This is partly why C.G. Jung and the great Islamic scholar Henry Corbin, who specially favored the works of Ibn Arabi and was initiated by Surawardi, could meet one another eye to eye and see each other as involved in the same spiritual mission. In a letter dated May 4th, 1953, C.G. Jung writes to Henry Corbin and says, "Yet I must tell you how delighted I was by your work. It was an extraordinary joy to me, and not only the rarest of experiences, but even a unique experience, to be fully understood." When Ibn Arabi refuses to resolve the tension between monotheism and polytheism, he is essentially preventing what Henry Corbin calls metaphysical idolatry. This is partly related to the notion of the tension between the one and the many. We'll get to that later. However, Ibn Arabi's veiling and unveiling of reality, which occurs at the conjunction between the human and the divine, and his realization of the reality that lies behind the apparent dualism of monotheism and polytheism, I argue, is still operating within a totalizing monotheist metaphysics. There is a seemingly charitable monotheistic view that all the manifestations of deities in various pantheons, like the Hellenic or the Egyptian, are simply aspects or attributes of the one God. Understood from within the perspective of a worshipper of a god of a monotheistic faith like Christianity, Islam, or Judaism, the divine names and attributes can be understood as being analogous to the polytheist pantheon of gods. In fact, this is how Algis Uzdavinis understands it when he says, quote, "For Proclus, the secret names of gods are constituted by an efficacious theurgic combination of sounds and the similarity between a god and his hieratic agalma, statue or image." Also, he says, "Since the name is an image of the thing named, and both are integrated into the demiurgic word, each name constitutes and discloses the destiny of the object named, that is, relates it to the system of royal archetypes." For both Proclus and Ibn Arabi, there are many divine names of gods, or their epithets, some of which are known to us, and many of which have not yet been revealed. For both Proclus and Ibn Arabi, there are many divine names, or, in Proclus's case, gods, and their epithets, some of which are known to us, and many of which have not yet been revealed. But the most integral part of a deity is not produced from the one, as a manufacturer produces a product or a creator a creation. The one, it's important to remember, does not collapse the multiplicity of gods, since the gods themselves are utterly unique and beyond substance, or what we understand as being. And more importantly, they do not derive from the one. The metaphysics of polytheism, intensively elaborated in Proclus's system, preserves the integrity of each of the gods as a unique individual, from which being emerges. Within each god is a tension between their unique, irreducible individuality, their hyparxis, or existence, and their powers, their dunamis. The divine names, which can be understood as their powers, extend into the realm of being and allow us to communicate and interact with them. So in summary, although some may speak of divine names as deities who represent aspects of a singular, overarching god, the Neoplatonic metaphysical tradition, with its emphasis on henodology, would see the divine names as self-manifestations of power of each god in their chain of procession as they produce being. Throughout this video, we will be invoking the works of the one and only Al-Shaykh al-Akbar of Islamic mysticism, Ibn Arabi. For us to answer this question, we first need to understand what is a divine name and how it works within the cosmology and mythology of Islam. The Quranic opposition to polytheism can be characterized by the notion of idolatry. And nowhere is this tension made more explicit than in the fundamental rejection of Adam by Iblis, or later identified as Shaitan, the Islamic Satan. Surah Al-Araf 7:11-12 states, quote, "And we have certainly created you, then formed you. Then we said to the angels, prostrate to Adam. So they prostrated, except for Iblis. He was not of those who prostrated." It also says, quote, "He said, I am not one to prostrate to a human whom you created from clay." The interpretations of these lines depict Iblis's arrogance and ignorance. As we know, the name Adam has an etymological meaning associating it with clay or dirt, importantly formed by the two hands of Allah. The two hands of Allah that formed Adam and not Iblis were, quote, "the form of the world and the form of the absolute." According to Ibn Arabi, Iblis, quote, "on the contrary, is but a part of the world, and this gathering has not been given him." Ibn Arabi's interpretation of the text centers upon Adam, and in this regard it can be said that his approach is, quote, "humanistic." For although all the angels, along with Iblis, could hymn praises to Allah before Adam even existed, they did not know Allah's divine names. And it was Adam who not only knew those names of the Creator, but himself taught it to the angels. As a result, the angels were made to prostrate themselves before Adam. What we mean by humanism is that this act signifies the central role Adam, and by extension, the integrated man, plays in the establishment and continuation of the cosmos, and that Adam is the Insan Kabir, or the great man, is in fact what we would consider the perfect man, or the complete man, or the fully integrated man who has knowledge of all the divine names. An alternate interpretation is offered by Al-Hallaj, where he emphasizes the lover and beloved relationship between Iblis and Allah. And when Iblis refuses to prostrate himself before Adam because he is made of mud, he also argues that prostrating himself before any other besides Allah would be considered both idolatry and polytheism. He also argues that since Allah has preordained everything, and that he had commanded Iblis never to prostrate himself before any other being or any other thing, that this is in fact a spiritual test sent by Allah. And in order to pass this test, meaning not to go against the commands of Allah, Iblis allows himself to suffer and endure the pain of departure or banishment away from the presence of the beloved. Al-Hallaj's interpretation emphasizes the tragic nature of the necessary separation and mystical yearning that characterizes the relationship between creator and creature. But the critical importance of the presence of Adam is best expressed by the works of Ibn Arabi. The cosmos can be understood as, quote, "an unpolished mirror." We can see how the mirror imagery is reminiscent of our last video on Plotinus. But rather than having the mirror itself representing the cosmic unfoldment and generation into matter and multiplicity, or according to the interpretation of Vassilopoulou, the mirror acting internally as the soul's extension and tool for reversion back to its source, Ibn Arabi makes the central act of cosmogenesis revolve around what he calls the polishing of the mirror. Quote, "What was required was the polishing of the mirror. That is the world, and Adam was that very polishing of that mirror and the spirit of that form." The real, al-Haq, existed before the universe came into being, but it only existed in the mode of the unmanifest. Perhaps we can understand this as a realm of potentiality. Within this unmanifest realm of the real, the divine names exist in the essence of the absolute, and they experience incredible tension and pressure from the collection of all the pent-up potential they have within themselves and which they cannot release or actualize. And so they cry out to the Creator for manifestation and the release of this potential energy. And that can occur only when there is a vessel or container that they can then inspirit with their powers. Ibn Arabi states, quote, "The names, previous to their existence in the outer world, exist hidden in the essence of the absolute, all of them seeking an outlet toward the world of external existence. The state is comparable to the case in which a man holds his breath within himself. The breath, held within, seeks an outlet toward the outside, and this causes in the man a painful sensation of extreme compression. Only when he breathes out does this compression cease. Just as a man is tormented by the compression if he does not breathe out, so the Absolute would feel the pain of compression if it did not bring into existence the world in response to the demand of the names." In this way, when the divine breathes, it is the same as him uttering the command be, or kun, or in Greek esto, to the world, and hence bringing into manifestation from the interior out into the exterior. What this means is that the actualization of the divine names, which initially existed only as, quote, relationships in potential, creates the meaning and instantiation of the relationship itself when it finds a vessel. And this is done by the creation of a cosmos. Essentially, a mirror reflecting the potency of the divine names. A hadith of the Prophet Muhammad refers to the 99 names of Allah, but Ibn Arabi understands these 99 names to be the essential names that can classify and encompass a multitude or an infinite plurality of names. Put it in another way, these 99 names can be considered the most powerful, and all other names can be collapsed within them, all of which serve to create and maintain the cosmos. The divine names are not only things of the world, but are also events that occur within the world. As I just mentioned, the divine names exist in a state of potentiality, but are only actualized when there is a corporeal, embodied, or material pole by which it can manifest itself in the cosmos. Essentially, these divine names are the forms of divine self-manifestation, called tajalli, and hence each divine name is simultaneously a reality unto itself, as well as an aspect or attribute of Allah. So according to Ibn Arabi, divine names have a twofold structure, in the sense that they are at the same time identical with their essence, that is Allah, since each is a self-manifestation of Him, occurring in a multiplicity of theophanies, but also importantly, each divine name is considered independent from the essence. Although they are attributes, they each have their own reality, and in this regard, they are unique. In the metaphysical system of Proclus, we can use the technical Greek term idiotes, which means peculiar or unique, which Proclus would characterize the gods as being. But in the Neoplatonic sense, the gods exist in a polycentric manifold, which means that they are all in all and all in each. They are unique individuals, but also contain all the other gods within each of them. In this sense, they do not participate the way beings participate, where we are comprised of both sameness and difference, in the sense that we are all the same under the form of anthropos or the form of human, but different in terms of our unique individuality that is irreducible with respect to another person. Ultimately, the polytheist gods are not attributes of a singular deity. Such divine names include, for example, Ar-Rahim, most merciful, Al-Hakim, the all-wise, As-Salam, the all-perfect. However, the most all-encompassing name and the most powerful one is Rahman, or the merciful. And the all-encompassing comprehensiveness of this name is due to the fact that it collects and unifies all the diverse names into a unity, constituting the Absolute, or Allah. The Nafas al-Rahman, or the breath of the merciful, is essentially the act that brings forth all things from the interior of potentiality to the exterior of actuality. But it is important to note that for Ibn Arabi, this is not a one-off spark of creation, but is a continually ongoing process of cosmogenesis, as the cosmos breathes in and out at every conceivable moment. Al-Haq, or the real, creates the mirror of the cosmos, and the polishing of the mirror occurs within the heart of the complete or perfect man, the Al-Insan al-Kamil. As we quoted earlier, Adam is the act of the polishing of the mirror. Quote, "What was required was the polishing of the mirror, that is the world, and Adam was that very polishing of that mirror in the spirit of that form." But to attain and continue to maintain the state of a fully integrated human, the human ego must pass away. As a note, this is not a singular occurrence that once is accomplished never needs to happen again. This is not some sort of ego death that some New Agers would speak about. From the human point of view, the polishing of the mirror occurs both in time and eternally, and must always be performed anew. This is what is called marifa, or divine knowledge, which is a type of knowing that continually undergoes transformation, because in gnosis, there can never be such an object of knowledge that is finally attained and at last grasped. In the process of polishing the mirror, the mystic or the fully integrated man, rather than experiencing the divine names as exterior entities, like the seer or the hearer, have diminished their egoic natures to such a degree as to become a fully empty vessel, so that it can be said that, quote, "He gives him of himself in accordance with the image in which he appears to him." In this mystical union, or theophanic union, the creator and the created, the spirit and the inspirited, subject and object have merged into one another and have become united. At this point, the divine names are no longer externalized, but are in fact instantiated and actualized the moment there is a union between the human and the divine. The divine names appear in the polished mirror just as Adam, who represents the act of the polishing of the mirror, and the human ego finally vanish, along with the mirror itself. In this sense, the real becomes the ultimate subject who is actualized within the Al-Insan al-Kamil. Paradoxically, then, it is the creature who conveys deity to Allah, for it is not until the object of creation that the creator achieves his status as Lord. In this way, the Persian Sufi mystic Sal al-Tustari can say, quote, "The divine lordly condition has a secret, and that secret is you. If this you/I were to be removed, the lordly condition of the divine Lord would also be abolished." It is the image of one's Lord, one's God image, that the vassal or servant is united with. It is the horizon of his being. Ultimately, what has happened in this theophanic union is the utter collapse of what Immanuel Kant would call the noumenal with the phenomenal, such that there is no longer a distinction to be drawn between the two. Henry Corbin notes that, quote, "The creatural being is its own secret," and finds similarity of the interdependence and interrelationship between the Lord and the vassal in the words of the German priest, mystic, and poet Angelus Silesius, quote, "God does not live without me. I know that without me, God cannot exist even for a blink of an eye." Corbin and C.G. Jung were deeply influenced by the Arthurian myths and the legends of the Grail saga. This sense of a quest to find the Holy Grail is precisely the journey within the psyche to attain that treasure which is the, quote, "secret of the lordly condition." However, as we know, there are always dangers along the spiritual path. pitfalls and traps and delusions. In the process of polishing the mirror, there is such a great danger, and that is the danger of binding. In order to understand what Ibn Arabi means by binding in his own formulation of idolatry, we need to revisit the Quran. In the Quran, it is said that at the last judgment, the polytheists, the mushrikun, will seek help from their gods. But their gods will not be able to help them since, quote, they have no saviors. Noah, who is the speaker, is rallying the true believers against the polytheists, who claim that their deities are separate entities rather than manifestations of the one real deity, Allah. For Noah, he believes the polytheists are utilizing deception, makir. But Ibn Arabi is quick to note that Noah himself is also practicing a form of deception. Although Ibn Arabi admits of the need to restrain the profusion of polytheistic worship at the expense of the hidden truth that God is in fact one, he is also subtle enough to realize that Noah is similarly practicing deception by hiding the fact that there is a natural tension between monotheism and polytheism. This would not, in fact, be understood in the same manner by Hellenic worshippers, but Ibn Arabi sees this opposition as representing the tension between transcendence and immanence. Allah being the transcendent one, while the infinite multiplicity of divine names and material idols are the immanent gods that the polytheists worship. Noah insists that the polytheists and the true believers be called to Allah. For Ibn Arabi, when Noah accuses the polytheists of leading people astray, he understands this to mean that they bring people into a state of, quote, mystic perplexity or bewilderment, hayra. According to Ibn Arabi, such a state occurs when the linear and rational logic of Noah, with his wish to bring people to Allah, is dissolved. Ibn Arabi understands this as an element of idolatry, because even if the circumstances warranted it, Noah is affirming transcendence without immanence. For presuming that the polytheists who worship the instantiations of deities, or the people who worship idols like natural wood or stones and the herbs, need to turn to God as if they had been physically separated from him, and that he exists in some fixed location, somewhere transcendent. This, of course, is a misguided notion. All are still ultimately worshipping Allah himself, even if they are ignorant of it. What Ibn Arabi is suggesting here is that rather than viewing bewilderment or perplexity as a state to avoid from the perspective of rationality, like the Greek notions of aporia, we must see in this uncertainty and bewilderment a higher form of knowledge that is achieved through the circularity of constant transformation. And this occurs in the heart of the mystic, and is simultaneously revealed and veiled through the works of knowledge and love. This, my friends, is true gnosis, marifa. It is a continual process that can never step aside and claim the truth as if the truth is an object of possession. As Al-Isfakhani says, quote, when the knowledge reaches their hearts, he gives them to drink from the cup of the secret, from the intimate communion with the secret of his love. They then wander about in bewilderment, longing for him. In essence, it is the heart where this divine knowledge and divine love are linked, which constitute gnosis. The type of rationalization that essentially evacuates God and disconnects him from the immanent world is a form of binding. A binding of oneself to a delimited notion of God. In his Fusus al-Hikam, Ibn Arabi states in chapter 3, entitled The Seal of the Wisdom of the Breath of Divine Inspiration in the Word of Noah, quote, since he is, by meaning, the spirit of whatever is outwardly manifest, he is also the inwardly hidden. His relation to whatever is manifested of the forms of the world is the relation of the governing spirit to the form. The definition of man, for example, includes both his inward and outward, and it is the same with every definable thing. Allah is defined in every definition, yet the forms of the universe are not held back and he is not contained by them. One only knows the limits of each other forms according to what is attained by each knower of his form. For that reason, one cannot know the definition of Allah, for one would only know his definition by knowing the definition of every form. This is impossible to attain, so the definition of Allah is impossible. Similarly, whoever connects without disconnection has given limits to Allah and does not know him. Whoever combines connection and disconnection in his gnosis and describes Allah with both aspects in general, because it is impossible to conceive in detail, because we lack the ability to encompass all the forms which the universe contains, has known him in general and not in particular, as he knows himself generally and not in particular. For that reason, the Prophet, may Allah bless him and grant him peace, linked knowledge of Allah to knowledge of oneself, and said, quote, "Whoever knows himself knows his Lord." Ultimately, the real manifests in everything and everywhere. And for Ibn Arabi, importantly, the real also manifests in the religious beliefs of others, since each belief opens onto and reveals a transcendent reality, and therefore to deny another's belief is tantamount to denying the particular manifestation of the transcendent God. In 1976, Henry Corbin submitted an article to the Eranos conference entitled, quote, "The Paradox of Monotheism." In it, he outlines how the Muslim gnostics and theosophers, particularly from the school of Ibn Arabi, were able to overcome what he called metaphysical idolatry. This is an interesting article because it not only discusses Ibn Arabi's thought through his metaphysics, but also compares elements of Proclus's metaphysics, which clearly Corbin had studied. However, it should be noted that Corbin's analysis of Proclean metaphysics is not quite reflective of the Neoplatonist's actual thought, and is slightly misinterpreted by the scholar who is operating under his monotheistic metaphysical presuppositions. It is a rather lengthy essay, so I will try to be brief and quote Corbin whenever I can. Corbin, along with Ibn Arabi, identifies a paradox at the heart of all monotheistic faiths and shows three distinct phases. First, in its exoteric form, namely the profession of faith that declares there are no gods but God, monotheism perishes in its triumphant moment, unknowingly obliterating itself by becoming metaphysical idolatry. We just discussed an example of this when Noah negates false deities and affirms the transcendence of Allah. There are three types of sages of God, and each have their own mode of vision. In this instance, this person who believes this possesses intellect and, quote, conceives the creatural as being what is manifest, apparent, exoteric, and the divine as being what is concealed, hidden, or esoteric. The divine is a mirror reflecting the creatures, but he does not see the mirror. He only sees the form that is manifested therein. This person proclaims divine unity as that of the ens supremum, the supreme being, the existent being that dominates all the others. A second stage is monotheism attains salvation and obtains its truth only by attaining its esoteric form, whose symbol of faith is expressed as, quote, "In being there is only God." For the naive soul, this too seems to obliterate monotheism. Exoteric monotheism thus arises at the esoteric and gnostic level of what he calls theomonism. However, just as the exoteric level is constantly subject to the menace of metaphysical idolatry, so too the esoteric level is threatened by the danger that arises from a mistaken interpretation of the word being. Essentially, the danger of the esoteric occurs when people are mistaken about the word being, when they confuse the act of unity of being, the aynai, the esse, or the wajud, with the unity of the existent being, which is the on, or the ens, or the mawjud. The essential difference between wajud and mawjud, and the danger in their confusion, is that mawjud makes God an ens supremum, which means an existent being that is infinitely above all other beings, i.e. a supreme being. In such cases, the soul can never truly ascend to the divine, since it therefore becomes impossible for an existent to become an ens supremum, or for an individual being to become the supreme being. So there arises an unbridgeable divide between the two. The person who functions under this mode of vision, quote, sees the divine as what is manifest, visible, and the creatural as what is concealed, hidden, and not apparent. For him, the creatural is the mirror reflecting the divinity, but he as well does not see the mirror. He only sees the form that is manifested therein. Here the mirrors reflect each other. The dispersed or widely separated units are gathered and totaled in a unique whole. The danger here is the confusion between unity of being and unity of the existent being. All that is other than the unique existent, all that constitutes the many, is then said to be inexistent, illusory. Again, quoting Henry Corbin, quote, Tawhid is causative. It means to make one, quote, to enable the becoming of one, to unify. In being, the act to be, there is only God, which does not amount to saying that the only existent being is God, which would be mawjud. To prevent this misinterpretation, Haidar Amoli declares that Tawhid is to affirm being, wujud, and to deny the existent being. It is to deny that Tawhid professes the unity of an existent, for it professes the unity of being, i.e., of the act of being. William Chittick, along with more modern scholars, refrain from translating wujud as the act of being and suggests for Ibn Arabi it means just about everything. Quote, God has wujud, or rather God is wujud, and everything else also has wujud in one mode or another. And he also says, quote, an extremely important implication of the word wujud that comes out when we translate it as finding is that wujud is not simply something that is there to be found. Wujud also finds, which is to say that awareness and consciousness are among its essential attributes. Hence, wujud is not simply to exist or to be, it is also to be alive and to be aware. But for the intents and purposes of this video, this distinction won't make much of a difference with respect to our question regarding the divine names as polytheistic gods. The third stage, finally, Henry Corbin states, is that of integral ontology, which presents itself as an integration of the two previous levels, which he constitutes as metaphysical pluralism. In this case, the person possesses both intellect and vision. This is the man of Haq al-Yaqin, who is the mystic philosopher or the hieratic in the Neoplatonic sense. This person simultaneously sees the divine in the creature, the one in the many, and the creatural in the divine, the multiplicity of theophanies in the unitude that theophanizes itself. This results in a complete and whole vision of the one God and the many divine forms. For some, this, quote, integration of the integration is the simultaneous vision of the one essence and the multiple divine names and attributes. This is the vision of multiplicity in unity. For others, it consists of the vision of the divine being in multiple theophanies, in the multitude of figures that clothe the divine names by manifesting themselves. This is the vision of unity in multiplicity. Both are each other's necessary complement. The vision of the perfect sage presupposes simultaneous vision. The main difference between the Metaphysics of Proclus and Ibn Arabi's school is casually remarked upon by Henry Corbin, and this is the crux of the matter and an answer to our question. Quote, one therefore needs to consider the relationship between being, wujud, and existent being, mawjud. We shall advance two hypotheses. Does the one absolutely transcend being itself, or is it concomitant with being, of the act to be, that transcends existent beings? The first interpretation is Plato's interpretation as held by Proclus. Is the source of being itself superbeing, beyond being, hyperousion? The second interpretation is from Suhrawardi's Ishrakiyun, in the school of Ibn Arabi. The transcendental one and being complement each other in the very concept of light of lights, origin of origins, etc. But in both cases, he's referring here to Proclus's case or Ibn Arabi's case, the procession of being is essentially theophany. What we find in all Abrahamic religions is a metaphysical notion of ontotheology, which was critiqued by Martin Heidegger, just like the critique we outlined in Corbin's essay. This critique revolves around the confusion between mawjud and wujud. Essentially, ontotheology is understood as a combination of theology and ontology, which sees God as the most supreme and highest entity, combined with a notion that all of being is a singular reality constituted of a single essence or ousia. On a similar note, Corbin uses the term theomonism to describe the belief that reality is of one substance or principle and its relation with a personal transcendent God. For Proclus, the principle of the one and all the gods in their polycentric manifold are beyond intellect, life, and being. They are indeed hyperousios. For Henry Corbin, there is no hyperousios, for that is non-being and darkness. But it is only much later in the procession, if we can allow ourselves the use of a temporal term here, that the one of each deity gives rise to being as a whole. In fact, there are 4 possible combinations: the one that is in relation to itself, the one that is in relation to being that is one that is one in relation to the one that is, and being that is one in relation to itself. In these 4 combinations do we find the ways by which the gods and the cosmos establish their relationship with one another. The one that is a manifestation of a prior transcendent principle, whereas the being that is one is a lower unity that is comprised of both existence, being, and perfect unity, oneness, through all the things that participate with one another to form the all. In summary, the one that is, in relation to being that is one, would be equivalent to the act of being, wujud, but is beyond being itself, ultimately. Whereas the being that is one in relation to the one that is, mawjud, is the equivalent of the ens supremum. I hope this video has helped in the understanding of the theosophical and gnostic works of the masterful Ibn Arabi, and has aided in answering some of the questions regarding the divine names and the gods. In fact, Henry Corbin draws such a parallel. Quote, "There are all the names by which it can be named, and flowing from this the divine attributes denoted by the names. For example, the knowing and knowledge, the desiring and desire, the viewing and vision, etc. At a corresponding level, one may evoke the procession of the divine names in the Hebrew Book 3 Enoch, or the gods in the Greek Neoplatonists. These eternal hexades respond to the nostalgia of the divine names aspiring to be revealed, to be invested with concrete existences that underpin them. There is complicity between the divine names and these hexades, without whose actualization the divine names, as denoted by the plural gods in the expression God of gods, invested respectively in beings, would remain forever unknown and unrevealed. What I love about the older conception of polytheisms around the world is that they provide a metaphysics that allows all gods to shine forth and to also be considered transcendent, without construing such clashes to be a matter of either or supremacy and domination. As a polytheist, I must believe in the existence of all the gods, whether it is Allah, Yahweh, Thor, or Zeus. For each group of people, and on an individual level, each worshipper, a different god can be considered supreme, omnipotent, and transcendent. Such is the experience of the worshipper as they stand in a moment of ecstasy of prayer and adoration in front of their god or goddess, their Lord, and us, the worshippers, as each of us is an individual keeper of that secret that manifests the relationship into actuality. It is truly a blessing and a healing balm that the gods have chosen to reveal themselves to us in a world fraught with division and suffering. So let us honor them, each according to their natures.
Allah Allah gaziler deyin şah manam
نام علی است بر لبانم پیر 12 مومن
خطاییم اغدریم سوزی شکردن دردیم
منم شاه قزل باشم منم شاهم شه